the new experiences we have, whether they're positive or negative, but particularly it's harder with the negative ones, and kind of integrate them and move forward with them, the better it is, because we can't change them. You know, no matter how much we want to go back, we can repair them, but we can't change them.
So you're continuing to talk on this issue and to be influential on this issue, but also in the last couple of years, you've been asked to comment on Me Too and that, and all the issues around that. Talk to me about how you think about that, because it's felt like that's been complicated. You have been very vocal at times saying it's wrong to frame you as just a victim. You're an agent, and yet this is the story about abuse of power. There's everything else. So talk about that.
Well, I think it's the Me Too movement, which started 10 years ago, that Torontoburg started. It's an example of one of the positive ways social media has helped us. I don't think hashtag #MeToo would have exploded in that same way without social media, or I think in the course of the conversation, just recognizing that there can be positive things from the internet. What happened for me, I think, with this movement and my experience of it was like I was almost planted in a different soil, the seed sort of put into this different, more fertile soil for a specific way to kind of come to look at and understand my own experiences. I had written about this, but somebody had reached out to me who had been very public in this movement and had said that she was sorry I had been so alone. And it was really kind of in the tears that just, poured out of me after I read that I started to recognize that there maybe was something for me to look at here, that it wasn't a binary movement of you were assaulted or not assaulted, or harassed or not harassed, that it was more nuanced. And I felt then, and I still feel now, that there are many more voices of Me Too stories that should kind of be heard and get attention before mine, because I don't think that I'm a perfect fit into sort of I don't tick all of those boxes, but I do think that it's a very important story around abuse of power.
Talk about how we should think about that.
Well, I think it's that we never should have even gotten to a place where there was a yes or a no, did I want to or did I not want to. That question of consent was already kind of tainted by the fact of the extreme inappropriateness, in part because of his station, his job, his privilege as a powerful white male. I was also privileged, but I think for a very long time I just saw the abuse as having been something that happened once it became public.
Right.
And as a result of the Me Too movement, and I think my maturity and my healing, but the ability to sort of see how I had been gaslit, to see how there had been abuse and abuse of power from the very get-go, that we never should have been on the precipice. We never should have been standing in a room alone. But I think particularly as a public person with my history, I've just seen so many people try to decide whether or not I was a victim.
Right.
And that age-old question of victim or vixen, and which is a question we shouldn't be asking in 2019.
Yeah, I think that's right. The answers to that question is not always at one end of the spectrum. And that if our worldview only allows it to be at one end of the spectrum, we are missing something important. In other words, that yes, there are obvious cases where someone has been a complete victim, they've been assaulted,
right,
and they have no power over it. That's one thing. But there can also be really unfair instances where it's not as clear-cut as that, but nonetheless something unfair happened because of unbalanced power situations.
Obviously the end result is worse in the other scenario, but it's almost kind of similar to the short skirt issue. If a young woman was, or an older woman, if a woman was wearing a short skirt, was she asking for it? So that there's sort of that somehow is different than somebody who might have been covered up head to toe, somehow, that even though that end result was that they were assaulted. But I think the bigger question, or the bigger thing that I hope comes out of this, aside from systemic change in not only the workplace, but kind of the ways that we're looking at equality really in society, is also around the conversations of victims and targets and trauma. I've heard since the beginning, I think many people have, conversation, or there was one last week of should so and so, who fill in the blank of usually a man who has been #MeToo, should they be allowed to get their job back? Should they be allowed to X, Y, and Z? But I actually think the focus and the questions should be different. The questions starting out should be less about what does a perpetrator need to do right now, what do they need to do to redeem themselves, and it really, before we're worrying about how to, for the perpetrator to come back, we should be focused on helping to repair the people who've been harmed.
Well, Monica, you've felt this, it feels like, and more than a lot of other people. And what I'd love you to do is, if you could write a little love letter to a 21-year-old who's curious and alive and trying to figure out what she wants to do in the world, other than the obvious things like beware internships in the White House. What would you? What are some things you'd want to implant in that young woman's mind, in that young man's mind, and anyone in that formative stage of their life?
I think probably the most important would really sort of be an echo of what I said in the talk, which is really that you can survive anything and you can move past it. Forgive yourself, and I hate to quote myself, but no, you can insist on a different ending to your story, that it's not over till it's over. It's one of the reasons that I'm so grateful for having had the opportunity to give a TED Talk and for teachers playing this in school. And most of my friends have kids, a lot of them do, and I'm kind of various names of Auntie Monica, some call me Bob, but it's and I used to worry so much about what was going to happen when they would get to that place in their history class in school, and all of a sudden, if their parents hadn't talked to them before, like, what, that's Aunt Monica? That's sort of a narrative. And so this, just no one, I marvel at it all the time, and I'm grateful, and my family's grateful, and this idea that instead, or alongside that narrative that had been there for such a long time, is a different narrative. That I hope is the lasting impact. And that's what I would try to impart is you can't imagine it now. You can't imagine it being different or better, but it can happen.
Well, the fact that 21 years after that nightmare, you're sitting here, you've rebuilt your life in a
bananas.
Yeah, it's in a beautiful way. So it's hard to imagine anyone going through anything that where what you just said isn't applicable, that you actually can get past the last 20 years. Anyone can. And so thank you for the inspiration of that, and really wish you so much luck in your next chapter going on from here. Bravo to you. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode. Do consider sharing it with any of your friends or family who would be moved by Monica's story. Please also consider writing a review. And if you'd like to learn more about online bullying and what you can do to help fight it, please check out the Tyler Clementi Foundation at tylerclementi.org. This show was produced by Sharon Mashihi. Our editorial director is Michelle Quint, production manager Roxanne Eyelash. Our mix engineer is David Herman, and our theme music is by Alison Leighton Brown. Special thanks this week to Anthony Gordon-Lennox and AGL Communications. That's
estrangement takes many forms. Sometimes we sever ties with our family or friends. Sometimes they sever ties with us. How many years would you say it's been since you have been in a room with your 3 kids?
2008.
14 years. I'm Anna Sale, and this is Estrangement, a new 3-part series on death, sex, and money. Listen wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome to the TED interview. I'm Chris Anderson, and this is the podcast series where I sit down with a TED speaker and we dive much deeper into their ideas than was possible during their TED talk. Today on the show, Tim Ferriss, the life hacker. He's an author and podcaster who's built up a massive group of followers thanks to his bottomless well of advice on pretty much everything. Your work habits, your health, your hopes, dreams, and fears. His first book, The 4-Hour Workweek, was on the New York Times bestseller list for 4 consecutive years. He offers readers the prospect of once and for all turning your boring work life into something much more productive, much more satisfying. In his 2017 TED Talk, he shared his philosophy of Stoicism and encouraged us to question what it is that we're afraid of.
What if I'm ... question mark? This is whatever you fear, whatever is causing you anxiety, whatever you're putting off. It could be asking someone out, ending a relationship, asking for a promotion, quitting a job, starting a company. It could be. For me, it was taking my first vacation in 4 years, stepping away from my business for a month in London to either remove myself as a bottleneck in the business or shut it down.
In this episode, we're going to zoom into these questions, talk about the personal space they come from for Tim, and then zoom out and discuss his philosophies around them. We'll be having conversations about some pretty intense topics, including depression, his brush with suicide, and his exploration of the mystery and potential of psychedelic compounds. Without further ado, here's Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd love to talk with you a bit about this crazy book that kind of put you on the map. 4-Hour Workweek. Essentially what the book was saying, based on your own experience of the prior years, that it was possible for people to move from being a drone, doing a sort of 40-hour week working for someone else, to taking control of your life. Essentially, perhaps in stages, moving out of a job, doing your own entrepreneurial thing, and doing it in a way that was so efficient and leveraged, using the internet, using overseas assistants, using all kinds of efficiency tools that we spoke about to cut your actual work down to 4 hours a week, and then do all the other things that you ever dreamed of doing, from traveling the world to learning languages to poetry to whatever. So you delighted so many people with the promise. You probably infuriated a few people as well who felt, come on, you are over-promising here. I mean, first of all, Tim Ferriss himself, there's no way he's working a 4-hour work week. He's one of the hardest working people out there. You know, with the benefit of 11 years of wisdom and experience, like, what are some of the things that you would want people to take away from this book now?
Yeah, the 4-Hour Workweek. What a blessing and a curse that title turned out to be. We split test titles and subtitles on Google AdWords, and the one that had the highest click-through rate was the one that we ended up using. So that was how we arrived at the 4-Hour Workweek. But the 4-Hour Workweek...
Tim, just before you go on, by the way, that's a terrible basis for a title, because if we did that on TED Talks, every talk would be, I don't know, instant sex with the hottest person of your dreams, you know, how to in 2 minutes. Like, the test of bears some relation to reality.
Well, letting the mob decide from scratch what things will be will end up being, right, the instant sex, forever, $1 million lottery ticket. That's going to end up as your headline. But the 4-Hour Workweek is intended, first and foremost, to help people to maximize their per-hour output, whether they work 4, 10, 40, or 80 hours a week. And I think that is why this book really hit a tipping point within Silicon Valley and tech entrepreneurs and so on. Initially, that was the and true fans, the early adopters who helped to make this book a bestseller. I think the reason the book appealed to many people of that set is that also people at the highest levels of finance and so on who are also working 80, 100-hour weeks, is it applied measurement and analytics to testing assumptions related to work. That would be part one. The second is that I would say the objective of that book was to check off some of the lower rungs and middle rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs so that people can then focus on contribution and other forms of helping and giving back. It's not just about creating some type of automated business and running around gallivanting. That's an option, but it's not the only option. So those are the two things I would point out. And I've thought about going back and updating the book or modifying it in some way, but I really, because there are certain things in that book I see, which was written when I was 29, 41 now, and they make me cringe. I'll be honest. Like, there's certain things that just make me kind of put my hand to my face and cringe, but...
Give me one example.
I was 29, I felt like I had a lot to prove, and I think I was puffing my chest up a bit much, and I was not public-facing at all at that point, and I think sought more validation than I do now, hopefully, and that's reflected in some of the writing. Nonetheless, there was some gestalt that book captured, which was very genuine to me at the time, and still is genuine, but it captured my life at that point.
The people out there, you can think of two different kinds of people who are essentially spectators of a kind, that they view their lives as things to be navigated, to be survived. And then there's a different kind of person who wants to say, wait a second, I could be the author of my future in a more explicit way in some sense. Is that a meaningful difference, first of all?
I think it is. I think that another way to delineate might be looking at those people who on a day-to-day basis spend the majority of their moments reactive, and so you have mostly reactive, then you would have partially reactive, partially proactive, then you have mostly proactive.
Yeah, so that reactive proactive thing is interesting to me, because I often think of myself as containing, there are multiple me's inside this head, but the two me's that I think about most and sort of worry about most almost is what I would call the sort of instinctive, reactive me that I associate with years and years of biological evolution, this sort of very complex biological thing. But then there's this reflective me, and it's the thing that is capable of editing the rest of what we do. In many ways, the agenda that I personally crave, and that I think you encapsulate in so many ways, is how to give that reflective self power in the battle between the two selves.
Definitely, it's not a matter of mutual exclusivity, but the reactive versus reflective is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. In part because I think I've spent most of my life being highly reactive, having anger as a go-to default response to many things, having aggression and strong offense as this romanticized approach to conquering life, but ultimately finding a lot of my behavior really self-destructive, and that what I viewed as my internal voice was not in fact my internal voice at all. I didn't choose the voice in my head. It was absorbed by people around me over childhood, and it was time for a revisit. The reflective capacity can be cultivated, and I say that as someone who I think was very, very weak in that department for decades, and went to stimulants and depressants and so on to self-medicate to manage around it. So I think it's important to establish for people the baseline, which is not me coming out of the womb and like judo chopping the universe with conquering insecurities from the get-go. I had a lot of what I would view as emotional deficits that led me to look at a lot of these things.
Well, one of the deficits, for want of a better word, that you spoke about I think you recorded it 10 years ago. It was the idea of how, if you could overcome fear, you could do amazing things. And you gave these three examples of how, despite being terrified of water, you learned to be a very good swimmer, how you learned Japanese in an impossibly short time, and how you became a tango dancing champion somehow in some ungodly way that just seemed kind of like almost beggared belief.
I would want to highlight also the fact that the swimming that you mentioned was basic swimming to begin with. Let's just talk about being able to swim to and fro in a pool was something I could not do until I was in my 30s. And it took me a long time. That is someone who grew up on Long Island surrounded by water. The first question I'll very often ask when looking at any field, and I'm sure many people throughout history have done this, I'm just one in a long list, and that is, who is good at this, who shouldn't be? Who doesn't fit the mold? Who isn't built like a spider? Or in learning a language, who has learned, say, a supposedly difficult language for a native English speaker like Chinese, Mandarin, late in life? Is there a single example? And if so, what did they do? And these are questions, certainly any search engine can help you do some preliminary searching, but you could also, as I did, I would go to anyone I